Tim, where in the world are you right now?
Well, I have to confess, I'm in a hotel room in Perth, in Perth, Australia, where I've just been going through an exercise of trying to get a corporate organisation to follow a science-based target to making its contribution to solving climate change.
Well, why do you say this? And that's not a terrible thing to be in Perth, is it? You say
it's not bad.
Because you're, if I'm not mistaken, you and I met at Arab about 15 years ago, maybe plus or minus. And Tim,
that's right.
Yeah. And Tim is an environmental scientist and author, filmmaker, adventure, public speaker, currently a global ambassador of the World Wildlife on WWF. I met Tim when he was trying to help Arab become a better version of itself. And we found a lot of common ground on that, and this has been your passion. And he is one of a small group of people that I know that has walked to the South Pole. And how many times did you do this?
Well, I've only been to the pole once, but Antarctica 10 times, doing various different things.
For those of us up in the northern hemisphere, it seems to be all the same place. You know, it's one big hunk of ice, right? But down to the Antarctic 10 times, walked to the South Pole once, and you also did an amazing journey by yourself. And you were recreating the Shackleton exhibition, if I'm not mistaken, and not the expedition.
Yes, look, I've done 2 trips the old way, if you like, using 100-year-old technology. But one of them was retracing the journey of Sir Ernest Shackleton, and I've to be honest, been using that expedition, ever since as a good means by which to sort of describe some of the techniques we might employ to better communicate climate change and the need for action to corporate and political audiences. So it's been a very good messaging tool.
Well, that's good, but I think it was also an incredible journey for you. And I can recall, and this is every time I hear your story, and I think you're going to show us a video in just a second. But I recall you telling me about on one of your journeys to the Antarctic, how you came across something which was supposed to be a river of ice, and it was all water. And how that just shocked you.
Well, the difficulty with climate change, of course, is that it's very difficult to see 418 parts per million of CO2 as the numbers now are, but you can see melting ice. It's a very tangible thing, and I know in Switzerland we have glacier retreat happening, but it's obviously also happening in the Antarctic and the subantarctic with even bigger consequences. And yes, following Shackleton's footsteps, he had to cross 3 big glaciers back in his day, but for me it was 2 and a wade across a kind of watery lake. The glacier itself had completely melted.
Yeah. I remember you telling us. So you have a video you wanted to share with us. What was the video?
I haven't got a video at my end. I don't know if you've got something lined up at yours, but...
All right. Well, then we don't. Okay, we don't have the video. So
it's me.
Tell us, Tim, tell us a little bit more about the Shackleton journey and what you did, and a little bit about what you learned while you were doing that.
Well, look, he was a heroic era explorer around 100 years ago, and he went to Antarctica on a bid to cross it from one side to the other on foot. And the whole expedition, I think it's fair to say, went wrong with the loss of his ship. And the rest of the journey for him and his 27 men was all about survival. And so the journey for them involved living on the pack ice for 10 months in the stricken ship before it sank. And then him and his 27 men making their way to an Antarctic island where he left most of them behind. And then a rescue journey where he headed off across the Southern Ocean in essentially a 6.5 meter long keelless rowboat to try and raise the alarm and get everybody that he left behind rescued, which he managed to do. And, it was an amazing undertaking. And in the 100 years since his expedition, I think people have pretty much accepted that it was his leadership really that got people through. And I've learned so much from my years in polar expeditioning, but particularly his journey, retracing his journey, that I now bring to bear on some of these big issues. Like, for example, when he was faced with the loss of his ship, and he had 27 men all looking at him, wondering what would happen next, and they were frankly facing certain death, and he managed to have the emotional intelligence to speak to each one of them in a different way that he felt that would resonate with them, to get them wanting to be part of a singular effort to save themselves. And I think this is something we have to do with climate change. We have to understand that, political and corporate audiences and individuals are influenced by different arguments and different metrics and different things. And we need to use everything we have available to us to get them to want to pull as one, as part of a collective effort to save ourselves. A one-size-fits-all message of sort of guilt and fear very evidently has not got the outcome achieved yet. And with certain people, I think sort of scaring them into out of their complacency to want to do more is certainly something that works with some people. But with others, it's hearing the facts. With dare I say it, with people in the high finance world, they want to know how it's going to be paid for. Others are motivated by wanting to leave a legacy. And so I find that I'm using techniques I've learned from expeditioning to work out how to talk to those people, to get them to want to change behavior and be part of the solution. And there are many things, many things that I've learned from the lesson, but that's probably one of the main take-homes.
Thanks for that. You mentioned two things, one about leadership and the lack of singularity in messaging, and the importance of each and every individual being a leader, not just some figure that's on an organogram. So what does urgency mean for you? Because you're kicking us off on this sort of urgency section. And I know this has been something we've talked about in the past, the urgent need for action, but you've seen this. And so what's your feeling on urgency?
Well, I think urgency is about understanding the urgent need to act without being overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge facing us. And this is something that I'm constantly treading this fine line between, scaring people with the enormity of the challenge that we're faced with, versus not wanting to reassure them that everything will be okay. I call this pragmatic optimism, by the way. You tell it like it is. You don't sugarcoat how challenging it will be, but you come up with the solution to save this situation in which we find ourselves. And I think there are two sort of existential threats, if you like, that we're faced with. One, of course, is climate change, from the environmental point of view anyway. And the other one is the degradation of ecosystems. And that can be anything from plastic in the ocean to air quality that claims over 4 million lives a year, through to the loss of the species that we share the planet with. So I think they're the two big issues that I'm working on. But as I say, I think urgency is all about making people understand the immediacy with which we must act, without scaring them to the point where they are so overwhelmed with the scale of the challenge that it results in a sort of the deer in the headlights moment where people don't do anything.
The paralysis. So, Tim, I'm going to give 2 seconds. Audience, or your 2040 community. Does anyone want to ask a question of Tim? We have another 15, 20 minutes. Anyone who's been to the Antarctic before? Anyone been to the Antarctic before? We've got one person who's been there. There's a question over here, and then there's another question towards the back. We got two more over here.
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me? My name's Mike. I'm Australian, and thank you for everything you're doing and have done. When you're talking about communicating with different audiences, how do you approach the task of communicating with the Australian government, which is famously complacent and denial in the face of all of the change that we're seeing in the world?
Ooh.
Interesting one. I used to get, when it was a reality that thankfully it no longer is, what I would say to Donald Trump if I ever had a conversation with him about the need to act on climate change. And I think taking a leaf out of what I said before, I would probably say to him, if I had my elevator conversation, if I could offer you something that will provide jobs for America, energy security, and your continued position at the top of the global order, would you be interested? And the answer is renewable energy, and sell it to him in a way that resulted in me kind of getting what I want, which is America going on a new path, whilst he got what he wanted out of it, which was them remaining, in the ascendancy. Look, my natural inclination is to try and win an argument, but I'm actually these days more concerned with getting an outcome, and I think it's about how you get these messages across to people to get the outcome you want that is almost as important. And so I think someone like Scott Morrison, I don't have a lot of time for what he stands for or the position of his government. But I do see Australia has an incredible role, number one, as a global carbon sink. In fact, ETH itself, with the Crowther Institute, did the work saying that Australia has the 5th largest amount of land area for planting trees to perform the role of a global carbon sink. 58 million hectares, by the way, was the figure they gave. And the other one is that Australia could be a renewable energy exporter and make a tremendous amount of money out of it, and much, much more money than we could get in the bulk shipping of fossil fuel to places like China. And indeed, there's work going on at the moment looking at the feasibility of what they're calling the Sun Cable, which is a 12,000 hectare solar array in the Northern Territory that would transport power to Singapore via a subsea cable, 3,750 kilometre long, and would provide 10 gigawatts of power, which is 20% of all of the installed renewable energy in Australia to date, just in that one project. And look, it stacks up financially. So I can see that saying something like that to someone like him would represent a way by which you could convince them of the economics of going down that particular path. So I think, look, I'd like to win the argument by saying he should do it for the benefit of future generations, for the benefit of the planet itself from a philosophical point of view. But I think there are really, really strong business cases that can be put forward about us being a global carbon sink and also being a net renewable energy exporter that would appeal to someone like him, frankly.
Cool.
I think both parties on either side of the spectrum would get behind that.
Okay, Jim, thank you. Another question right here, David.
David, in very practical terms, so very much building on the previous one, what's your repertoire to start the conversation where you have to assume the other side either does not see, feel, or share any sense of urgency, and how much time you're willing to spend to kind of engage yourself in order to prep the ground for having that conversation? How you manage that, and what are the tools and tricks you apply to get there?
Great question.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've typically, it depends. I mean, I think audiences are more aware now. The problem we face now is that it's all talk and not much action. But I think, whereas if you went back 5 years ago, I might have in a 45-minute talk used 35 minutes justifying the fact that we have a problem, normally talking about climate change and the loss of biodiversity, and perhaps 10 minutes talking about solutions, to now just doing a quick 10-minute recap, letting them know the extent of the problem at the beginning, and maybe 35 minutes on solutions and how they can be applied. And so I think the emphasis is very much changed. The short answer to your question is, if it's someone who really doesn't want to have a conversation about on the environment side of things, I've used expeditions as a good vehicle to have a conversation about things like leadership and teamwork and problem solving. And every corporate organization is interested in that kind of stuff. And then you can almost pitch your environmentalism by stealth on the back of your leadership lessons related to expeditions. And you find that you win them round. Sometimes it's a quick win. Other times you have to build a relationship, and how long you're prepared to work depends on how big the potential prize is. But I think I've managed to really change the direction of some pretty large corporate organizations with that kind of approach.
Good answer. Environmentalism by stealth. Don't even bring the E word or the C word into that. That's great. We have another one here.
Thank you, Tim. Katerina here. I would like to ask about Shackleton expedition. When you talk with people who have power and impact to maybe change the world, but how you can persuade them to think beyond the interests of the people they know and care, their bodies and friends, like for Donald Trump, maybe Texas oil magnates, and instead to extend their concern towards some random people or maybe hedgehogs or whoever. So in terms of the Shackleton expedition, you told how he showed the leadership by talking to each of the 27 people and united them behind the task of saving themselves. So how would you go around the challenge of talking to members of Shackleton expedition and persuading them to mobilize behind the task of, I don't know, saving penguins from the killer whale attacks instead of minding their own business?
Well, it's a very, very good question. I think, look, I think a definition of leadership is about getting a group of people to pull in the same direction to achieve a singular goal, acknowledging they come from very different start points. And I think that's the one thing I've learned more than anything is the need to understand what the motivations are of the people to sort of work out a way of persuading them. And, you know, just take a few examples. I used to be a patron of an organization involved in trying to get kids outdoors more often. And, you know, my goal is to have those kids have formative life experiences as children so they grow up into adults who want to save the planet. But for the parents who you have to convince to get them to participate in these programs, you have to show them some of the developmental and educational benefits for the kid. And so you talk about how increased physical activity helps combat the problem of obesity that we have in a lot of Western countries. You talk about the problem-solving ability and the decision-making ability and the resilience that it builds in children and the emotional intelligence it builds of spending time playing in nature. So you're selling the benefits on the basis of understanding the audience of people. The organic food industry is really, the organic food industry in Australia particularly is about really the health of the individual. And so you're selling the idea of the need for more organic food to be grown based on the health benefits for the person, knowing that that's what's important to them. Whereas for me, it's the broader environmental benefit of not having so much herbicide or pesticide or GMO in the system. But for the individual concerned, you have to really think in terms of the health benefits. So, look, I think the answer to your question is you're always trying to find an angle. That's not to say I don't just tell people the way it is and shame them sometimes into doing more or tell them the way it must be. But if I find a more subtle approach is needed, you're always looking for some way to sort of sell the idea a bit more effectively to get the outcome you want.
That's great. So essentially knowing the messages your audience needs to hear, not what you necessarily want to tell them, but what they need to hear in order to make action happen.
I think so. I mean, I think if you start off with a conversation where your first conversation is to sort of blame them for the problem, whether they're a mining company or an electricity generator or a farmer who's involved in something you don't believe in, it could be a very short conversation and you'll go away with the satisfaction of having told them your view, but you won't necessarily get the change you want. And like I say, I'm not somebody who backs away from having a good old argument, but at the end of the day, I'm sort of more interested in getting really big outcomes achieved. And sometimes the best way to do that is to get to know them. We don't have unlimited amounts of time for this, of course, and so it doesn't take long before I get onto the conversation about how we can change what they're doing. But I'm always trying to sell it to them in ways that they feel comfortable with or can recognize. because I'm conscious that we need that change to happen.
Great. Thank you, Tim. We have another question over here. Who else has a question like this? Tim? Anyone else over there? Okay. Ben? Christian?
My question is relatively simple. How would you go about to explain others, in particular various types? So let me start again. Sorry. Recently, I received by a wealth management company a piece of paper that was showing the stock exchanges of various kinds, SMI, DAX, NASDAQ, and so on, going since World War I, presumably, all the time up. Right? It had only one direction. There was some whims, ups and downs. So the whole point of this company was, if you invest your money just long enough, it's going to rise all the time. What is the equivalent index for you, or how should it be created, also with your experience, to show that basically nature doesn't always go in this direction?
Well, it's a very good question again, and you look interested. It's very interesting because I have that kind of conversation with people here already. Because Australia is not got a large population, but it does have a very large superannuation fund. In other words, the size of the pension fund in Australia is the fourth biggest in the world. We have $2.2 trillion in Australian pensions held by just mums and dads and people. And this is 220 times the amount of money in the United Nations Green Climate Fund, which is being contributed to by all the world's countries to try and sort of supposedly solve climate change from the United Nations perspective. So look, I'm always talking to people about the fact that they can redirect their funds into a whole range of investment vehicles. Sorry to sound like a finance guy. That's terrible. But there are a whole bunch of offerings out there that allow you to invest in, electric vehicles, smart grids, blockchain technology, renewables, pumped hydro, all the sort of technologies that we will need into the future if we want to decarbonize the world. And those investments will probably earn you far more than a typical basket of, in inverted commas, normal investments, fossil fuel, telecommunications companies, pharmaceutical companies, and things like that. And I leave it at that. And you can show the evidence that the kind of returns those funds are now giving are higher than the traditional basket of funds. So, and again, in Australia, the argument for not having renewable energy or solar panels on your roof is no longer a financial argument. The financial side is a very solid case. It's just cheaper, and so you don't have to have a moral discussion with people because the economics stack up. It's just cheaper to go down that route. So, look,
right.
I think if you are able to delve deeply enough, you can find a good case that will satisfy most people. It's about just having that conversation and trying to change them. I'm very optimistic about renewable energy. I think we've really crossed the point now where, we're getting more electric vehicles on the world's roads. Okay, we're only up to 10 million globally, but that number will only rapidly increase, exponentially increase from this point on, and that will bring prices down. Same with battery technology. And the business case will become stronger and stronger, at which point you won't really have to have a moral discussion. You just have to have the business case to hand.
I think, Tim, the last point I think is you could just say, look, the context has changed. The world is not what it used to be. And that's you can think it's going to continue on the same curves. Mother Nature hates a straight line. She always does. She always deals with a straight line in all sorts of different ways. So we got time for one last question. Benjamin?
Yes, I'm curious. Considering we're based in Lux and we're in Switzerland, which has multi-languages and multi-cultures, and we have discussed leadership, I was wondering, Tim, how you confront convincing different cultures and different languages. And I throw a quote in by Nelson Mandela, who said, if you speak people's languages, you speak to their hearts. And that's how you can also convince them for change.
Well, that's a very good point. And look, I speak reasonably fluent Spanish if we're talking in literal terms. But I think the key point is really that actions really speak louder than words. And I try and always demonstrate the kind of principles I stand for by showing what can be done. I've been talking about the need for reforestation for a long time in Australia, for example. I've set up my own reforestation project, which has now become really quite successful. And it allows you to have a conversation with a farmer or a landowner who perhaps wouldn't listen to you if you were just another city-based policy person. But if you can show him or her that you have land, you're aware of the difficulty of the work that needs to be done, but you can show them the benefits and you can really show it practically speaking, then that's the way to speak people's language, is showing them examples of what can be done. Humans are great storytellers, and stories are all about us showing one another what can be done, examples of what can be done, and people will follow those if they can see them done. It's very uplifting to see practical examples in action, and I think that's what I try and stand for.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, now we do really have the last question because we're running out of time. So, Hannah.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I really enjoyed listening to your really insightful thoughts, and I would love to get your view on something, because I feel like there is a growing a sense of wanting to do something, and maybe a lack of knowing how we can do something. So how do you see individual action versus collectivist action, and how we can kind of leverage this willingness in a way? Like how can we turn that into impact? Because I feel like there is somehow on that kind of arc from wanting to do something to actually creating the impact where we're not making it all the way there. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, again, that's a very big question, but it's a very good question. Look, I think as an individual, you can green your own personal footprint very quickly. In fact, within a week, you can more or less decarbonize your entire life. You can eat less meat or no meat. You can cycle and walk and public transport instead of traveling by car. You can purchase offsets for your flights. You can call up your electricity provider and with one phone call or going to a website, pretty much change your home electricity plan to ensure that you're just receiving green, fossil fuel free power in your home electricity. If money allows, you can put solar panels on your roof. If money allows, longer term, you can look at electric vehicles. There's lots of things that individuals can do that actually, leaving aside cars and solar panels, are pretty inexpensive, and just changes to behavior that make a big difference very, 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 very quickly. Then you've got the opportunity, of course, to think about where your money is invested. And this is huge. An announcement was made just this week about Harvard taking all fossil fuel investments out of their endowment. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. In fact, something about the size of this figure is a bit distasteful, but Harvard's endowment is $43 billion US dollars. That's 4 times the amount of money that the Green Climate Fund has at the United Nations level, contributed to by all governments. And they've decided to divest. And that was down to individuals within the faculty and the student body deciding, after many years pushing, that this didn't reflect Harvard's values. And to their credit, they've made that decision to move away. So look, I think individuals can do a lot of stuff at a personal level. I think you can do a lot of stuff with where your money is invested. You can change the organizations for whom you work from within by being a voice for change. And you can also pick a project that you think makes a difference close to home and solve a particular piece of the problem. Don't try and take on the whole of climate change. Pick something a bit more tangible, closer to home, that does good, and work on that. And you'd be amazed how much impact that can have. Of course, there's voting, which is the final one, which of course is something that we in Western democracies have the benefit of being able to do. And I certainly hope that, come election time, the result here in Australia will be a very different one, but here's hoping.
Tim, thank you so very, very, very much for joining us from the western point of Australia, for sharing your example of leadership by example, an individual, as Hannah was just asking about, who truly is living his values and helping us understand by showing and reflecting how we can also be living our values. And Ben brought into us, how do we speak somebody else's language so we can speak to their hearts? And I think this is a very wonderful challenge. And I think you've bridged this as you've chosen the groups that you work with to speak to their hearts and understand their language. I think that's really quite really important for us to understand and to take forward as we think with pragmatic optimism what we are going to do as you have. So thank you so much, Tim. Let's give him.
Thank you.
And I wish you a wonderful rest of day or evening or whatever it is.
Thank you. Evening.
Evening. All right, man. Thank you.
And all the best. And you know, congratulations for this event. And I listened to about 20 minutes of the dialogue and your heartfelt talk, Chris, and really commend you for doing this. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for being here with us. Okay. So with that, everyone in this room, stand up.